fast asleep with Gina Marie. Do you need a place to just get away from everything? Well, you found it. You found your source for a captivating, classic short story. Hi, I'm Gina, and I have many classic short stories right here for you, so just hit the subscribe button. Well, I'm going to give you a bit of information about today's award-winning author, and then just tuck you into one of his best, somewhat dark, more adult stories. It's Roald Dahl, British author of short stories, poetry, screenplays, and famously children's literature. In 1916, he was born to parents of Norwegian descent, but born in Wales. He was one of 6 children, and his mother cared for the family alone after his father and one sibling died of pneumonia within weeks of one another when Roald was just 3 years old. He never attended university, but he did travel to Newfoundland with the public school's Exploring Society. He was a salesman for Shell Oil before joining the RAF during World War II and becoming a flying fighter ace. While serving, he survived a crash landing in the Libyan desert. Jumping ahead, with first wife actress Patricia Neal. He had 5 children. One, a 7-year-old girl who tragically died of measles, and an infant son who sustained serious brain damage in a car accident. There was one blessing that came of this last event, when Roald teamed with a toy maker and a neurosurgeon to invent a shunt that eventually treated thousands of brain-injured children. Roald Dahl died in Oxford in 1990 of a rare blood cancer. He was 74. There really is so much more to be said about Roald. Some very fascinating, some disconcerting. And we really have said it all right here on this podcast in earlier episodes when we featured his work. Feel free to scroll back. But with over 300 million copies of his work sold throughout the world, it's understandable why he is considered one of the greatest storytellers of the 20th century. And today's story, just more positive proof. You're going to love this one. First published in 1953. Tuck in, everybody, for Roald Dahl's Galloping Foxley. "5 days a week. For 36 years, I have traveled the 8:12 train into the city. It is never unduly crowded, and it takes me right into Cannon Street Station. Only an 11.5-minute walk from the door of my office in Austin Friars. I have always liked the process of commuting. Every phase of the little journey is a pleasure to me. There is a regularity about it that is agreeable and comforting to a person of habit. And in addition, it serves as a sort of slipway along which I am gently but firmly launched into the waters of daily business routine. Ours is a smallish country station, and only 19 or 20 people gather there to catch the 8:12. We are a group that rarely changes, and when occasionally a new face appears on the platform, it causes a certain discriminatory Protestant ripple, like a new bird in a cage of canaries. But normally, when I arrive in the morning with my usual 4 minutes to spare, there they all are, good, solid, steadfast people, standing in their right places, with their right umbrellas, and hats, and ties, and faces, and their newspapers under their arms, as unchanged and unchangeable through the years as the furniture in my own living room. I like that. I like also my corner seat by the window and reading the Times to the noise and motion of the train. This part of it lasts 32 minutes, and it seems to soothe both my brain and my fretful old body like a good long massage. Believe me, there's nothing like routine and regularity for preserving one's peace of mind. I have now made this morning journey nearly 10,000 times in all, and I enjoy it more and more every day. Also, irrelevant, but interesting, I have become a sort of clock. I can tell at once if we are running 2, 3, or 4 minutes late, and I never have to look up to know which station we are stopped at. The walk at the other end from Cannon Street to my office is neither too long nor too short, a healthy little perambulation along streets crowded with fellow commuters, all proceeding to their places of work on the same orderly schedule as myself. It gives me a sense of assurance to be moving among these dependable, dignified people who stick to their jobs and don't go gadding about all over the world. Their lives, like my own, are regulated nicely by the minute hand of an accurate watch, and very often our paths cross at the same times and places on the street each day. For example, as I turn the corner into St. Swithin's Lane, I invariably come head-on with a genteel middle-aged lady who wears silver pince-nez and carries a black briefcase in her hand. A first-rate accountant, I should say, or possibly an executive in the textile industry. When I cross over Threadneedle Street by the traffic lights, 9 times out of 10, I pass a gentleman who wears a different garden flower in his buttonhole each day. He dresses in black trousers and gray spats and is clearly a punctual and meticulous person, probably a banker, or perhaps a solicitor, like myself. And several times in the last 25 years, as we have hurried past one another across the street, our eyes have met in a fleeting glance of mutual approval and respect. At least half the faces I pass on this little walk are now familiar to me. And good faces they are, too. My kind of faces, my kind of people, sound, sedulous, business-like folk, with none of that restlessness and glittering eye about them that you see in all these so-called clever types who want to tip the world upside down with their labor governments and socialized medicines and all the rest. So, you can see that I am, in every sense of the words, a contented commuter. Or would it be more accurate to say that I was a contented commuter? At the time when I wrote the little autobiographical sketch you have just heard, intending to circulate it among the staff of my office as an exhortation and an example, I was giving a perfectly true account of my feelings. But that was a whole week ago, and since then, something rather peculiar has happened. As a matter of fact, it started to happen last Tuesday, the very morning that I was carrying the rough draft up to town in the pocket, and this to me was so timely and coincidental that, well, I can only believe it to have been the work of God. God had read my little essay, and he had said to himself, "Oh, this man Perkins is becoming over-complacent. It is high time I taught him a lesson." I honestly believe that's what happened. As I say, it was last Tuesday, the Tuesday after Easter, a warm yellow spring morning, and I was striding onto the platform of our small country station with the Times tucked under my arm and the draft of the contented commuter in my pocket, when I immediately became aware that something was wrong. I could actually feel that curious little ripple of protest running along the ranks of my fellow commuters. I stopped and glanced around. The stranger was standing plumb in the middle of the platform, feet apart and arms folded, looking for all the world as though he owned the whole place. He was a biggish, thick-set man, and even from behind he somehow managed to convey a powerful impression of arrogance and oil. Very definitely he was not one of us. He carried a cane instead of an umbrella. His shoes were brown instead of black. The gray hat was cocked at a ridiculous angle, and in one way and another there seemed to be an excess of silk and polish about his person. More than this, I did not care to observe. I walked straight past him with my face to the sky, adding, I sincerely hope, a touch of real frost to an atmosphere that was already cool. The train came in, and now, if you can, to imagine my horror when the new man actually followed me into my own compartment. Nobody had done this to me for 15 years. My colleagues always respect my seniority. One of my special little pleasures is to have the place to myself for at least one, sometimes two or even three, stations. But here, if you please, was this fellow, this stranger, straddling the seat opposite and blowing his nose and rustling the Daily Mail and lighting a disgusting pipe. I lowered my Times and stole a glance at his face. I suppose he was about the same age as me, 62 or 3, but he had one of those unpleasantly handsome, brown, leathery countenances that you see nowadays in advertisements for men's shirts. Oh, the lion shooter and the polo player and the Everest climber and the tropical explorer and the racing yachtsman all rolled into one. Dark eyebrows, steely eyes, strong white teeth, clamping the stem of a pipe. Personally, I mistrust all handsome men. The superficial pleasures of this life come too easily to them, and they seem to walk the world as though they themselves were personally responsible for their own good looks. I don't mind a woman being pretty. Well, that's different. But in a man, I'm sorry, but somehow or other I find it downright offensive. Anyway, here was this one, sitting right opposite me in the carriage, and I was looking at him over the top of my Times when suddenly he glanced up and our eyes met. "Do you mind the pipe?" he asked, holding it up in his fingers. That was all he said, but the sound of his voice had a sudden and extraordinary effect upon me. In fact, I think I jumped. Then I sort of froze up and sat staring at him for at least a minute before I got hold of myself and made an answer. "This is a smoker," I said, "so you may do as you please." "Well, I just thought I'd ask." And there it was again, that curiously crisp, familiar voice, clipping its words and spitting them out very hard and small, like a little quick-firing gun shooting out raspberry seeds. Where had I heard it before, and why did every word seem to strike upon some tiny, tender spot far back in my memory? Good heavens, I thought, pull yourself together. What sort of nonsense is this? The stranger returned to his paper. I pretended to do the same. But by this time, I was properly put out, and I couldn't concentrate at all. Instead, I kept stealing glances at him over the top of the editorial page. It was really an intolerable face, vulgarly, almost lasciviously handsome, with an oily, salacious sheen all over the skin. But had I or had I not seen it before, some time in my life? I began to think I had, because now, even when I looked at it, I felt a peculiar kind of discomfort that I cannot quite describe. Something to do with pain and with violence, perhaps even with fear. We spoke no more during the journey, but you can well imagine that by then my whole routine had been thoroughly upset. My day was ruined, and more than one of my clerks at the office felt the sharper edge of my tongue, particularly after luncheon when my digestion started acting up on me as well. The next morning, there he was again, standing in the middle of the platform with his cane and his pipe and his silk scarf and his nauseatingly handsome face. I walked past him and approached a certain Mr. Grummet, a stockbroker who has been commuting with me for over 28 years. I can't say I've ever had an actual conversation with him before. We are rather a reserved lot on our station, but a crisis like this will usually break the ice. "Grummet," I whispered, "who's this bounder?" "Search me," Grummet said. "Pretty unpleasant." "Very." "Not going to be a regular, I trust." "Oh, God," Grummet said. And then the train came in. This time, to my relief, the man got into another compartment. But the following morning, I had him with me again. "Well," he said, settling back in the seat directly opposite, "it's a topping day." And once again I felt that slow, uneasy stirring of the memory, stronger than ever this time, closer to the surface, but not yet quite within my reach. Then came Friday, the last day of the week. I remember it had rained as I drove to the station, but it was one of those warm, sparkling April showers that last only 5 or 6 minutes. And when I walked onto the platform, all the umbrellas were rolled up and the sun was shining, and there were big white clouds floating in the sky. In spite of this, I felt depressed. There was no pleasure in this journey for me any longer. I knew the stranger would be there. And sure enough, he was, standing with his legs apart, just as though he owned the place, and this time swinging his cane, casually, back and forth, through the air. The cane. Well, that did it. I stopped like I'd been shot. "It's Foxley," I cried under my breath. "Galloping Foxley, and still swinging his cane." I stepped closer to get a better look. I tell you, I've never had such a shock in all my life. It was Foxley, all right. Bruce Foxley, or Galloping Foxley, as we used to call him. And the last time I'd seen him, let me see, it was at school, and I was no more than 12 or 13 years old. At that point, the train came in, and heaven help me if he didn't get into my compartment once again. He put his hat and cane up on the rack and then turned and sat down and began lighting his pipe. He glanced up at me through the smoke with those rather small, cold eyes, and he said, "Ripping day, isn't it? Just like summer." Oh, there was no mistaking the voice now. It hadn't changed at all, except that the things I had been used to hearing it say were different. "All right, Perkins," it used to say. "All right, you nasty little boy. I am about to beat you again." How long ago was that? It must be nearly 50 years. Extraordinary, though, how little the features had altered. Still the same arrogant tilt of the chin, the flaring nostrils, the contemptuous staring eyes that were too small and a shade too close together for comfort. Still the same habit of thrusting his face forward at you, impinging on you, pushing you into a corner. And even the hair I could remember, coarse, slightly wavy, with just a trace of oil all over it, like a well-tossed salad. He used to keep a bottle of green hair mixture on the side table in his study. Oh, when you have to dust a room, you get to know and to hate all the objects in it. And this bottle, this bottle had the royal coat of arms on the label, and the name of a shop in Bond Street. And under that, in small print, it said, "By appointment, hairdressers to His Majesty, King Edward VII." I can remember that particularly because it seemed so funny that a shop should want to boast about being hairdresser to someone who was practically bald, even a monarch. And now I watched Foxley settle back in his seat and begin reading the paper. It was a curious sensation sitting only a yard away from this man who, 50 years before, had made me so miserable that I had once contemplated suicide. Though he hadn't recognized me either. Wasn't much danger of that because of my mustache. I felt fairly sure I was safe and could sit there and watch him all I wanted. Looking back on it, there seems little doubt that I suffered very badly at the hands of Bruce Foxley, my first year in school. And strangely enough, the unwitting cause of it all was my father. I was 12 and a half when I first went off to this fine old public school. Now that was, let me see, in 1907. My father, who wore a silk topper and morning coat, escorted me to the station. And I can remember how we were standing on the platform among piles of wooden tuck boxes and trunks and what seemed like thousands of very large boys milling about and talking and shouting at one another when suddenly somebody who was wanting to get by us gave my father a great push from behind and nearly knocked him off his feet. My father, who was a small, courteous, dignified person, turned around with surprising speed and seized the culprit by the wrist. "Don't they teach you better manners than that at this school, young man?" he said. The boy, at least a head taller than my father, looked down at him with a cold, arrogant, laughing glare and said, "Nothing." "It seems to me," my father said, staring back at him, "that an apology would be in order." But the boy just kept on looking down his nose at my father with this funny little arrogant smile at the corners of his mouth, and his chin kept coming further and further out. "You strike me as being an impudent and ill-mannered boy," my father went on, "and I can only pray that you are an exception in your school. I would not wish for any son of mine to pick up such habits." At this point, the big boy inclined his head slightly in my direction, and a pair of small, cold, rather close together eyes looked down into mine. I was not particularly frightened at the time. Oh, I knew nothing about the power of senior boys over junior boys at public schools. And I can remember that I looked straight back at him in support of my father, whom I adored and respected. When my father started to say something more, the boy simply turned away and sauntered slowly down the platform into the crowd. Bruce Foxley never forgot this episode. And of course, the really unlucky thing about it for me was that when I arrived at school, I found myself in the same house as him. Even worse than that, I was in his study. He was doing his last year, and he was a prefect, a Boazer, we called it, and as such, he was officially permitted to beat any of the junior boys in the house. But being in his study, I automatically became his own particular personal slave. I was his valet and cook and maid and errand boy, and it was my duty to see that he never lifted a finger for himself unless absolutely necessary. In no society that I know of in the world is a servant imposed upon to the extent that we wretched little boys were imposed upon by the Boazers at school. In frosty or snowy weather, I even had to sit on the seat of the lavatory, which was in an unheated outhouse, every morning after breakfast to warm it before Foxley came along. I could remember how he used to saunter across the room in his loose-jointed, elegant way, and if a chair were in his path, he would knock it aside, and I would have to run over and pick it up. He wore silk shirts and always had a silk handkerchief tucked up his sleeve, and his shoes were made by someone called Lob, who also had a royal crest. They were pointed shoes, and it was my duty to rub the leather with a bone for 15 minutes each day to make them shine. But the worst memories of all had to do with the changing room. I could see myself now, a small pale shrimp of a boy, standing just inside the door of this huge room in my pajamas and bedroom slippers and brown camel hair dressing gown. A single bright electric bulb was hanging on a flex from the ceiling, and all around the walls the black and yellow football shirts with their sweaty smell filling the room, and the voice, the clipped, pip-spitting voice, was saying, "So, which is it to be this time? 6 with the dressing gown on, or 4 with it off?" Stay with me. I'll be right back. So, which is it to be this time? 6 with the dressing gown on, or 4 with it off? I never could bring myself to answer this question. I would simply stand there, staring down at the dirty floor planks, dizzy with fear, and unable to think of anything except that this other, larger boy would soon start smashing away at me with his long, thin, white stick, slowly, scientifically, skillfully, legally, and with apparent relish, and I would bleed. 5 hours earlier, I had failed to get the fire to light in his study. I had spent my pocket money on a box of special fire lighters, and I had held a newspaper across the chimney opening to make a draught, and I had knelt down in front of it and blown my guts out into the bottom of the grate. But the coals would not burn. "If you're too obstinate to answer," the voice was saying, "then I'll have to decide for you." I wanted desperately to answer because I knew which one I had to choose. It's the first thing you learn when you arrive. Always keep the dressing gown on and take the extra strokes. Otherwise, you're almost certain to get cut. Even 3 with it on is better than 1 with it off. Take it off, then, and get into the far corner and touch your toes. I'm going to give you 4. Slowly, I would take it off and lay it on the ledge above the boot lockers. And slowly, I would walk over to the far corner, cold and naked now, in my cotton pajamas, treading softly and seeing everything around me suddenly very bright and flat and far away like a magic lantern picture, and very big and very unreal and sort of swimming through the water in my eyes. Go on and touch your toes. Tighter, much tighter than that. And then he would walk down to the far end of the changing room, and I would be watching him upside down between my legs, and he would disappear through a doorway that led down 2 steps into what we called the basin passage. This was a stone-floored corridor with wash basins along one wall, and beyond it was the bathroom. When Foxley disappeared, I knew he was walking down to the far end of the basin passage. Foxley always did that, and then in the distance, but echoing loud among the basins and the tiles, I would hear the noise of his shoes on the stone floor as he started galloping forward, and through my legs I would see him leaping up the 2 steps into the changing room and come bounding toward me with his face thrust forward and the cane held high in the air. Oh, this was the moment when I shut my eyes and waited for the crack and told myself that whatever happened, I must not straighten up. Anyone who'd been properly beaten will tell you that the real pain does not come until about 8 or 10 seconds after the stroke. The stroke itself is merely a loud crack and a sort of blunt thud against your backside, numbing you completely. I'm told a bullet wound does the same. But later on, oh my heavens, it feels as if someone is laying a red-hot poker right across your naked buttocks, and it is absolutely impossible to prevent yourself from reaching back and clutching it with your fingers. Foxley knew all about this time lag and the slow walk back over a distance that must altogether have been 15 yards gave each stroke plenty of time to reach the peak of its pain before the next one was delivered. On the 4th stroke, I would invariably straighten up. I couldn't help it. It was an automatic defense reaction from a body that had had as much as it could stand. You flinched, Foxley would say. That one doesn't count. Go on, down you get. Next time, I would remember to grip my ankles. Afterwards, he would watch me as I walked over, very stiff now and holding my backside, to put on my dressing gown, but I would always try to keep turned away from him so he couldn't see my face, and when I went out it would be, "Hey, you, come back." I was in the passage then, and I would stop and turn and stand in the doorway, waiting. "Come here. Come on, come back here. Now, haven't you forgotten something?" All I could think of at that moment was the excruciating, burning pain in my behind. "You strike me as being an impudent and ill-mannered boy," he would say, imitating my father's voice. "Don't they teach you better manners than that at this school?" "Thank you," I would stammer. "Thank you for the beating." And then back up the dark stairs to the dormitory, and it became much better then because it was all over and the pain was going, and the others were clustering round and treating me with a certain rough sympathy, born of having gone through the same thing themselves many times. "Hey, Perkins, let's have a look." "Oh, how many did you get?" "5, wasn't it? Oh, we heard them easily from here." "Oh, come on, man, let's see the marks." I would take down my pajamas and stand there while this group of experts solemnly examined the damage. "Rather far apart, aren't they? Not quite up to Foxley's usual standard." "But 2 of them are close. Actually touching. Look, these 2 are beauties." "Oh, that low one was a rotten shot." "Did he go right down the basin passage to start his run?" "You got an extra one for flinching, didn't you?" "By golly, old Foxley's really got it in for you, Perkins." "Bleeding a bit, too. You better wash it, you know." And then the door would open, and Foxley would be there, and everyone would scatter and pretend to be doing his teeth or saying his prayers, while I was left standing in the center of the room with my pants down. "What's going on here?" Foxley would say, taking a quick look at his own handiwork. "You, Perkins, put your pajamas on properly and get to bed." And that was the end of a day. Through the week, I never had a moment of time to myself. Oh, if Foxley saw me in the study taking up a novel or perhaps opening my stamp album, he would immediately find something for me to do. One of his favorites, especially when it was raining outside, was, "Oh, Perkins, I think a bunch of wild irises would look rather nice on my desk, don't you?" Wild irises grew only around Orange Ponds. Orange Ponds was 2 miles down the road and a half-mile across the fields. I would get up from my chair, put on my raincoat and my straw hat, take my umbrella, my brolly, and set off on this long and lonely trek. The straw hat had to be worn at all times outdoors, but it was easily destroyed by rain. Therefore the brolly was necessary to protect the hat. On the other hand, you can't keep a brolly over your head while scrambling about on a woody bank looking for irises, so to save my hat from ruin, I would put it on the ground under my brolly while I searched for flowers. In this way, I caught many colds. But the most dreaded day was Sunday. Sunday was for cleaning the study. And how well I can remember the terror of those mornings, the frantic dusting and scrubbing, and then the waiting for Foxley to come in to inspect. "Finished?" he would ask. I think so." And then he would stroll over to the drawer of his desk and take out a single white glove, fitting it slowly onto his right hand, pushing each finger well home. And I would stand there, watching and trembling, as he moved around the room, running his white-gloved forefinger along the picture tops, the skirting, the shelves, the window sills, the lampshades. Oh, I never took my eyes off that finger. For me, it was an instrument of doom. Nearly always, it managed to discover some tiny crack that I had overlooked, or perhaps hadn't even thought about. And when this happened, Foxley would turn slowly around, smiling that dangerous little smile that wasn't a smile, holding up the white finger so that I should see for myself the thin smudge of dust that lay along the side of it. "Well," he would say, "so you're a lazy little boy, aren't you?" No answer. "Aren't you?" I thought I dusted it all." "Are you or are you not a nasty, lazy little boy?" "Yes." "But your father wouldn't want you to grow up like that, would he? Your father is very particular about manners, is he not?" No answer. "Oh, I asked you, is your father particular about manners?" "Perhaps, yes." "Therefore, I will be doing him a favor if I punish you, won't I?" "I don't know." "Won't I?" "Yes." "We will meet later then, after prayers, in the changing room." The rest of the day would be spent in an agony of waiting for the evening to come, and oh my goodness, how it was all coming back to me now. Sunday was also letter writing time. Dear Mummy and Daddy, thank you very much for your letter. I hope you are both well. I am, except I have got a cold because I got caught in the rain, but it will soon be over. Yesterday we played Shrewsbury and beat them 4-2. I watched, and Foxley, who you know is the head of our house, scored one of our goals. Thank you very much for the cake. With love, from William. I usually went to the lavatory to write my letter, or to the boot hole, or the bathroom, any place out of Foxley's way. But I had to watch the time. Tea was at 4:30, and Foxley's toast had to be ready. Every day I had to make toast for Foxley, and on weekdays There were no fires allowed in the studies, so all the boys, each making toast for his own study holder, would have to crowd around the one small fire in the library, jockeying for position with his toasting fork. Under these conditions, I still had to see that Foxley's toast was 1. Very crisp, 2. Not burned at all, 3. Hot and ready exactly on time. To fail in any one of these requirements was a beatable offense. "Hey, you! What's this?" "It's toast." "Is this really your idea of toast?" "Well, you're too idle to make it right, aren't you?" "I try to make it right." "You know what they do to an idle horse, Perkins? Are you a horse?" "Well, anyway, you're an ass. So I think you qualify. I'll be seeing you later." Oh, the agony of those days. To burn Foxley's toast was a beatable offense. So was forgetting to take the mud off Foxley's football boots. So was failing to hang up Foxley's football clothes. So was rolling up Foxley's brolly the wrong way round. So was banging the study door when Foxley was working. So was filling Foxley's bath too hot for him. So was not cleaning the buttons properly on Foxley's OTC uniform. So was making those blue metal polish smudges on the uniform itself. So was failing to shine the soles of Foxley's shoes. So was leaving Foxley's study untidy at any time. In fact, so far as Foxley was concerned, I was practically a beatable offense myself. I glanced out the window. Oh, my goodness, we were nearly there. I must have been dreaming away like this for quite a while, and I hadn't even opened my Times. Foxley was still leaning back in the corner seat opposite me, reading his Daily Mail, and through a cloud of blue smoke from his pipe, I could see the top half of his face over the newspaper, the small bright eyes, the corrugated forehead, the wavy, slightly oily hair. Looking at him now, after all that time, was a peculiar and rather exciting experience. I knew he was no longer dangerous, but the old memories were still there, and I didn't feel altogether comfortable in his presence. It was something like being inside the cage with a tame tiger. "Oh, what nonsense is this?" I asked myself. "Don't be so stupid." My heavens, if you wanted to, you could go ahead and tell him exactly what you thought of him, and he couldn't touch you. Hey, that was an idea. Except that, well, after all, was it worth it? I was too old for that sort of thing now, and I wasn't sure that I really felt much anger towards him, anyway. So, what should I do? I couldn't sit there staring at him like an idiot. At that point, a little impish fancy began to take hold of me. What I would like to do, I told myself, would be to lean across and tap him lightly on the knee and tell him who I was. And then I would watch his face. After that, I would begin talking about our school days together, making it just loud enough for the other people in the carriage to hear. I would remind him, playfully, of some of the things he used to do to me, and perhaps even describe the changing room beatings, so as to embarrass him. A trifle. A bit of teasing and discomfort wouldn't do him any harm, and it would do me an awful lot of good. Suddenly he glanced up and caught me staring at him. Oh, it was the second time this had happened. I noticed a flicker of irritation in his eyes. All right, I told myself. Here we go. But keep it pleasant and sociable and polite. It'll be much more effective that way, more embarrassing for him. So I smiled at him, gave him a courteous little nod, and then, raising my voice, I said, I do hope you'll excuse me. I'd like to introduce myself. I was leaning forward, watching him closely, so as not to miss the reaction. My name is Perkins, William Perkins, and I was at Repton in 1907. The others in the carriage were sitting very still, and I could sense that they were all listening and waiting to see what would happen next. "But I'm glad to meet you," he said, lowering the paper to his lap. "Mine's Fortescue, Jocelyn Fortescue. Eton, 1916. Introduction information for this episode is from an article entitled, Who Was Roald Dahl? And it's from biography.com and other sources in our show notes. We would love to hear what you think. Do it right here in comments or email us at fastasleepwithginamarie44@gmail.com. or reach us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Your reviews, likes, comments, and oh yes, those subscriptions, they're what keep us here for you. And we are very grateful that you are listening. Keyword, offense. Good night.